Imagine meeting another human who isn't quite like you. They walk upright, use tools, hunt animals, control fire, raise children, and yet they belong to a completely different human species. Sounds impossible today, but around 50,000 years ago, this was reality. Modern humans were not alone. Neanderthals were living across Europe and parts of Asia, while other human relatives existed in different parts of the world. For thousands of years, our species shared the planet with them, and then, somehow, they disappeared. For a long time, we imagined Neanderthals as stupid, primitive cavemen who simply couldn't compete with us. But the real story is much stranger, because the more we discover about Neanderthals, the harder it becomes to explain them as simple-minded brutes. They had large brains, powerful bodies, sophisticated tools, social groups, and evidence suggests they cared for injured members of their communities. And the biggest twist? They didn't completely disappear. Part of them is still inside us. So who exactly were the Neanderthals? They weren't just ancient humans with funny hair and giant eyebrows. They were a close relative of modern humans that evolved along a separate branch of our family tree. They lived through some of the harshest environments of the Ice Age, and their bodies were built for it. They were generally shorter and much more muscular than modern humans, with broad bodies, strong bones, and distinctive skulls. Their large noses and compact body shape may have helped them deal with cold environments. Imagine trying to survive a European winter without heating, supermarkets, warm clothing, or modern medicine. Now imagine doing it with nothing but stone tools, fire, and whatever food you could find. Neanderthals did exactly that, not for a few years, but for hundreds of thousands of years. Their lives were also dangerous. Hunting wasn't like it is today. If you wanted meat, you couldn't simply buy it. You had to get close enough to an animal to kill it. And some of the animals Neanderthals hunted were enormous. Mammoths, wild cattle, horses, rhinoceroses, and other powerful animals could seriously injure or kill a hunter. That's why Neanderthal skeletons contain something fascinating. Injuries, broken bones, and other serious trauma appear in their remains, and many of those injuries healed. That means these people didn't necessarily abandon someone when they became injured. Some individuals survived major physical problems long enough for their bodies to heal. Someone had to help them obtain food and stay alive. In other words, Neanderthals weren't simply individuals fighting for survival. They were members of social groups that could care for their vulnerable companions. And then there's the brain. Neanderthal brains were remarkably large, on average at least comparable in volume to modern human brains. But bigger doesn't automatically mean smarter. If brain size alone determined intelligence, we'd have some very awkward conversations with whales. What matters is how a brain is organized and what an animal can actually do with it. And Neanderthals could do quite a lot. They manufactured stone tools, controlled fire, processed animal hides, hunted strategically, and survived across enormous areas of Eurasia. Their technology wasn't frozen in time either. It changed over hundreds of thousands of years. Some archaeological discoveries also suggest that Neanderthals used pigments, ornaments, and other objects that may have had symbolic meaning. We can't look into their minds, but these discoveries make the old image of a clueless caveman look increasingly ridiculous. But one question remains especially difficult. Could Neanderthals talk? We obviously can't ask one, which is probably the biggest problem with studying extinct humans. But scientists can search for clues. Neanderthals possessed a version of the FOXP2 gene associated with speech and language in modern humans. That doesn't prove they spoke like us, because language depends on far more than a single gene, but their anatomy and brain organization provide additional clues that they were capable of sophisticated communication. Maybe they had a language that sounded completely different from ours. Maybe they relied heavily on gestures, facial expressions, rhythm, and simple sounds. We simply don't know. And that uncertainty is fascinating because language leaves almost no physical trace. A stone tool can survive for tens of thousands of years. A conversation disappears the moment it ends. Think about what communication would have meant for Neanderthals. One person could learn where water was and tell someone else. A hunter could explain where dangerous animals were found. An experienced adult could teach a child how to make a tool. Knowledge could move from one generation to the next, and that's incredibly important because intelligence isn't only about what one individual knows. A group becomes powerful when its members can share what they know. Neanderthals may have been doing exactly that. They also lived in small communities. They raised children, searched for food, built shelters, maintained fires, and survived together. Their existence wasn't just about hunting. It was about cooperation. Imagine a Neanderthal child sitting beside an adult thousands of years ago, watching them carefully strike one stone against another. The child tries. The stone breaks incorrectly. They try again. Eventually, they learn. That simple interaction represents something enormous, culture being passed from one generation. Then, around 50,000 years ago, modern humans entered many of the same regions where Neanderthals already lived. Suddenly, two different human populations were sharing the same world. Both walked upright, used tools, controlled fire, hunted, and raised children. So what happened when they met? For a long time, scientists imagined a simple story. Modern humans arrived, defeated the Neanderthals, and replaced them. But genetics revealed something much more surprising. They interbred. Ancient DNA shows that many modern people with ancestry outside sub-Saharan Africa carry a small percentage of Neanderthal DNA. That means some of our ancestors and Neanderthals had children together. We don't know exactly what those encounters looked like. They may have involved relationships, cooperation, migration, or circumstances we'll never understand. But their histories became permanently connected, and that changes the idea of Neanderthal extinction. When we say Neanderthals disappeared around 40,000 years ago, it doesn't mean they simply vanished overnight. Their populations were relatively small and scattered. Climate was changing, food could become unpredictable, and modern humans were expanding into the same environments. Competition may have played a role, and other factors could have contributed too. Their disappearance was probably the result of several pressures working together. But here's the strange part. Maybe the Neanderthals didn't completely disappear. Some may have been gradually absorbed into expanding modern human populations. Their genes could survive even after Neanderthals stopped existing as a separate group. And that's what makes their story incredible. The Neanderthals are gone as a distinct human population, but part of their genetic legacy survived. Somewhere in the distant past, a Neanderthal met a modern human. Their descendants carried that ancient connection forward for thousands of generations. Today, tiny fragments of Neanderthal DNA can still be found in many living people. So perhaps the question isn't simply, why did the Neanderthals disappear? Maybe it's, how much of them survived? They weren't monsters. They weren't failed humans. They were another branch of humanity that survived for hundreds of thousands of years, made tools, cared for their communities, controlled fire, and shared the planet with our ancestors. For most of human history, being human didn't mean being the only human. There were other humans watching ancient fires, raising children, hunting for food, and wondering what existed beyond the next hill. Eventually, they disappeared as a separate people, but they left something behind. A part of their story is still inside us, and if you want to discover more forgotten stories about the humans who came before us, subscribe to the channel. And tell me in the comments, if you could meet a Neanderthal for one day, what would you ask?